What a great story about how Jesus calls his first disciples. You know, there is another story that you may or may not have heard about. It's about a little girl who went to Sunday school for the very first time. Now, when she came home, of course, her parents were real interested in what she thought about Sunday school. And Mom asked, well, what did you think? How was it? And the little girl said, oh, it was fine. It was fun. But I think that the Sunday school teacher was Jesus' grandma. All she ever did was show us pictures of a baby Jesus and talk about Jesus. If you're a grandparent, I think you understand. And I know from Facebook that there are some proud grandparents out there, right? Well, just like in the children's message, when we're excited about things, when there's a passion that burns in our heart for something, we can't help but to talk about it, right? Right? Okay, hold on a second. Let me... Now, I wrestled with this idea whether I should wear it during the preaching moments and, thinking, well, maybe it's a little on the edge or something. But I determined that it was a praise worthy to lift up to God, for one. And then it does say Pastor Tom on it. So there you go. Congratulations to the Green Bay Packers. And if you know me, then you know I love to talk about the Green Bay Packers. They're my team, and I'm so excited about it. So just like the Sunday school teacher who showed pictures of the baby Jesus and talked about Jesus, and me and my Green Bay Packers and my talk about Jesus and my calling to preach the gospel, as followers of Jesus Christ, we should be a lot like Philip. We should be people that invite other people to come and see the glory of God in our lives, as well as to point how God has worked and is working in the world. We should offer our testimony to lift up the glories of God in the midst of the chaos and the upheavals and the unrest that we sometimes struggle with on this side of eternity. That's our job. That's our calling, to be like Philip and invite people to talk about Jesus. When I was going through seminary, I've said this before, but my evangelism teacher made it pretty clear to me that we talk about things that are important to you. If you're married, right, well, you can kind of tell if somebody's married these days because they got a ring on, right? So you assume, well, they're married. But what if you knew somebody was married, but yet you never heard anything about their spouse? You'd kind of wonder, wouldn't you? I mean, this is the most personal, deepest relationship that you have on this side of eternity, and you don't talk about your spouse at all. There's no words about your husband or your wife. That would seem kind of strange, wouldn't it? And we have this relationship with Jesus. How many of us wear all the symbols? We're here at church. We read the Bible maybe. We do mission trips. People might think we're maybe Christian and know Jesus, but do we risk ourselves enough to talk about Jesus? To talk about what he's done in our lives? Well, I think there's three things that we can take away from this passage of Scripture this morning. Three easy things that we can key in on. The first one is come and see, and that was Philip's invitation to Nathanael. Come and see this one that I found, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. Now he gets a little kickback, but he extends the invitation. We might get a little kickback too, if we talk about Jesus a lot. But I figure it's better to talk about Jesus and proclaim him as Lord and Savior than not to. Well, there's a story about a man in Texas, and He had that come and see attitude. He was retired, and so he didn't have much to do. You know, he had worked all his life, but he was also it was one of those times in life where a lot of people didn't finish high school. In fact, this man barely made it through the early elementary grades, and he couldn't even read or write. But he wanted to follow Jesus. He wanted to be obedient to what his calling was, to go and share Jesus with other people. So each and every morning he would get up and he'd get dressed and he'd go out to the road. He lived by a highway, and he'd stick his thumb out and he'd hitchhike. Now in his pocket, after somebody picked him up, he'd pull out a tract and he'd hand him a tract. And all he would talk about on his way to the next city over, which was, I don't know, half hour long, he talked about Jesus to these people. And then when he got to the other town, he'd turn around and stick his thumb out and hitchhike back, pull out the tract, ask him to read it, talk about Jesus. He did it so many times that 168 people actually found Jesus Christ in their lives. I can't brag of 168. I planted lots of seeds, I'm sure, but 168 is pretty impressive. Especially when you consider that the average United Methodist shares their faith and leads a person to Jesus once every about 80 years. You can go ahead and gulp hard. That's kind of shocking. We've lost that zeal for the evangelism that Jesus calls us to, that simple invitation to come and see. Now, I'm not suggesting that you go out here on Memorial Avenue and hitchhike down to downtown Kingsport, give somebody a tract and talk to them. That's probably not going to be your style of evangelism. But I know that each and every one of you has a story to tell. And only you can tell that story about how you've walked with Jesus during your life. I know that each and every one of us encounters people during our day that may or may not know Jesus. But we don't know unless we offer an invitation and they hear us talking about him or know that we have that relationship with him, right? Might be the person at the gas station. I've said it before. Do you know their name? It's always the same person. Now, you can swipe your debit card and avoid it all, but I bet once in a while you go inside. What about that cashier at the store? I know people are creatures of habit. I mean, we tend to go to the same store. If you go to Food City, you go to Food City. If you go to Ingles, you go to Ingles. You go to Kroger, you go to Kroger. And pretty much the same people are there all the time, aren't they? Do you know their names? I don't know. That's maybe a simple way to start a conversation with somebody about Jesus. To extend an invitation to come and see. You've got to find your way. God's gifted you in a unique and special way that, again, only you can share the gospel because of your personal experience with Jesus in a way that no one else can. Well, the second thing is that we've got to tell people about Jesus. We did a study a while back, and it was get their names. And one of the things that just sticks with me to this day is that if we go out on a mission trip or we deliver backpacks to the elementary school or backpacks into Africa, or we do a food collection or a scarf collection or whatever we do in ministry to meet the needs of those in our community, that's all great. That's awesome. But it's just service work if we don't mention Jesus. Because, I mean, face it, right? There's a lot of organizations that do good things. The Red Cross and United Way and the March of Dimes and the Ruritan Club and all of those civic organizations and PTAs that support people and do nice things and meet the needs of those in need. But we got to mention Jesus. You know, and when you do that, some remarkable things are possible. Miracles begin to unfold because we aren't really quite sure when we step out and take that risk, how much of an impact we may really be making. Let me share this observation with you. In 1858, a Sunday school teacher named Mr. Kimball led a Boston shoe clerk to Jesus Christ. His name was D.L. Moody. There's a Moody Institute, in case you don't know. It's a pretty big name. And he became an evangelist, set up an institute, and led a lot of people to Christ. And meanwhile, in England, in 1879, there was a pastor. His name was F.B. Meyer, and he was set on fire for the Lord. He came to America, to a college, to preach the good news. And under his preaching, there was a student named Wilbur Chapman, and he was saved. Wilbur Chapman engaged in YMCA work and employed a former baseball player, Billy Sunday. Billy Sunday caught on fire, and he began to spread the good news of Jesus Christ. And then one day, Billy Sunday had a revelation, and God spoke to his heart, and he said, "You need to go to Charlotte, North Carolina, and do a revival." And that revival stirred the hearts of so many people. It reached hundreds, but it particularly reached a small group of about 30 businessmen who just caught fire and decided that this had to happen, and they wanted a day of prayer for Charlotte. In May of 1934, a farmer lent his land to some men to use for their prayer meeting. The leader of the businessmen was Vernon Patterson. And he prayed a mighty and powerful prayer. He said, out of Charlotte, the Lord would rise up someone to preach the gospel to the ends of the earth. The businessmen were all called together at another meeting, and they asked Mordecai Ham, a fiery southern evangelist, to go and to shake up the town of Charlotte. And that farmer who had lent the land for the prayer meeting, you want to take a guess who that was? Well, Billy Graham's dad, Franklin Graham. And at that revival is where Billy Graham met Jesus Christ. And how many millions has Billy Graham reached for the sake of the gospel? Your impact makes a difference. You got to get out there and go and tell people about Jesus. And who knows what God will do through your obedience. But the next thing you got to do, you got to tell people about Jesus. But you do have to show people those mission trips, those food pantries, and all those ministries that meet people's needs. Those are important. Believe me, they make a difference. But, somehow or other, we've kind of lost that fire in our bellies and that passion in our hearts to do that. We'll kind of be willing to, show once in a while, or we might sponsor somebody, but are we willing to do it ourselves? Are we willing to live a life that reflects our relationship with Jesus? There was an auto mechanic who was the most knowledgeable auto mechanic in the world. He was amazing. He loved cars and trucks from the time he can remember, as a small boy through his teenage years and into adulthood. He ate, drank, and slept anything about automobiles. And he was good at it. In fact, he was so good at it, you could put a blindfold around his eyes, start up a car engine, and he could tell you exactly the make and the model of that car. He was that good. And in fact, he was so good about fixing cars and knew so much about cars. I mean, every car, not just Fords and Chevys and all that. He knew things like, Studebakers and Tuckers and Hudsons and all those cars of old, and the Pierce Arrow. He knew it all. And he was so knowledgeable that he could fix any of those cars. That was before the age of computer components. He was so knowledgeable he could fix it in his sleep. Well, he had every tool in his shop, of course. Every tool that you could possibly need, and even those special tools. I found out a while back that They actually build engines and then make tools so that you can fix the engine afterwards. Now, you can't just buy these like at Walmart. You got to go to a specialty store, order them from a dealer, and they usually have like some kind of weird angle on them or some weird opening, and you got to... He had every one of those tools. He had it all. He was knowledgeable. He had tools nobody had ever heard of, but there was one problem. He never worked on anything. He spent most of his day just organizing and cleaning his tools, reading manuals and searching for obscure bits of information about the vehicles he loved so much. But he never actually worked on the vehicles themselves. And as a consequence, his knowledge did nobody any good, did it? Because nobody ever came to his shop anymore. Yeah, I know a lot about Jesus. I've read the manual, the Bible. I've got some pretty good tools. But what would happen if I didn't tell anybody about Jesus? Nobody would come to the shop anymore, would they? Let me wrap it up with this short story. You got to go and invite to come and see. You got to go and tell. And you got to show and tell. And if we don't, we run the risk of something that we don't want to happen. There's a preacher, his name is Nathan Williams. And he talks about two men who had known each other, businessmen, for 20-some years. And one Sunday morning, they were at a restaurant, and one of them asked, well, where are you going this morning? And his friend said, I'm going to go play golf. What about you? And the other man said, well, I'm going to church. And he was kind of, a little sheepish about it, apologetic, in his words and his tone. And the other man said to him, well, why don't you give up that church stuff? And the first man said, well, what do you mean, give it up? And his partner said, well, I've known you for 20 years, and we've been in business together. We've sat in board meetings. We've worked on contracts, and we've built this business, and we've had lunch together. We've been over to each other's houses. We've had our kids play together and grow up together, but not one time have you invited me to church. Must not be that important to you. I hope we don't get ourselves in that position where we don't let others think our faith doesn't matter much to us at all. It should be number one in our lives, and we should be willing to say, come and see for yourself what Jesus can do, not in my life, but what he's doing in the world, in our community. And then have the boldness to go and tell and let people know what Jesus has done and is doing, and then to show and tell by living out a lifestyle that reflects Jesus in your life. None of us is going to do it perfectly, folks, but we got to try. So be like Philip. Invite them to come and see.